Nissan just confirmed it is closing 7 factories. 20,000 workers are losing their jobs, around 15% of everyone the company employs. And in a single fiscal year, Nissan lost 670.9 billion yen. That is about $4.5 billion gone, the third worst loss in the entire history of the company. And if you think this is just another car maker that bet too hard on electric vehicles and got burned, you are not even close. Because Nissan did not make one bad decision. Nissan has been making the same decision, the same way, for almost 30 years. The factory where this company was effectively born is now sitting on the closure list. That is not a coincidence. That is the whole story. So what is it about Nissan that nobody at the top has ever been able to fix? And how did the company that once saved itself from bankruptcy end up tearing down its own birthplace? Subscribe, because I break down every automaker that falls apart from the inside out. And I promise you, Nissan is not the last name on this list. To understand how bad this really is, you have to go back to a time when Nissan was the comeback story of the entire car industry. In the late 1990s, Nissan was nearly bankrupt, buried in debt, bleeding money, months from the edge. The French automaker Renault stepped in, bought a controlling stake, and sent in a man named Carlos Ghosn to save it. And for a while he did exactly that. Ghosn cut costs to the bone, shut the weakest plants, paid down the debt, and turned Nissan into one of the most profitable car companies on the planet. Business schools wrote case studies about him. The press called him a savior. At the center of that empire sat one factory, Oppama, a plant right on the water in Yokosuka, about 30 miles south of Tokyo. Oppama opened in October of 1961. It was Japan's first full-scale passenger car factory. It was the first plant in the country to put welding robots on the line, all the way back in 1970. The very first car it ever built was the Datsun Bluebird, the car that put Nissan on the map. Over its lifetime, Oppama has built more than 17 million vehicles. And in 2010, while the rest of the industry was still arguing about whether electric cars were even real, Nissan built the Leaf at Oppama and put it on the road ahead of everyone. Remember Oppama? We are going to come back to it. At its peak, Nissan was not playing defense. Nissan was expanding. New plants, new markets, and open goal to chase Toyota and Volkswagen for the title of biggest car maker in the world. The confidence was total. And confidence, when it is not backed by good cars, is just a more expensive version of the same mistake. That is not a strategy. That is momentum. And momentum is a dangerous thing to confuse for a plan. So here's the bet Nissan made. The bet was volume. Get bigger. Build more factories, build more cars, and move them out the door no matter what it took. For a few years, on paper, it worked. In 2017, Nissan sold roughly 5.8 million vehicles around the world. 17 plants across the globe, all of them running, all of them sized to build millions of cars a year. But there was a crack in the foundation, and it had a name. To hit those volume numbers, Nissan leaned hard on the cheapest, ugliest kind of sales there is. Heavy discounts, rental and fleet deals, cars sold thin to keep the plants busy and the totals up. It is the automotive version of a store that can only move product by keeping everything on permanent clearance. The cars went out the door, the brand went down the drain, and then the volume vanished. By 2024, Nissan was selling about 3.3 million vehicles a year, from 5.8 million down to 3.3 million. That is a drop of more than 40% in 7 years. Whole markets fell out from under the company. In China, once Nissan's single biggest market, sales went from roughly 1.5 million cars in 2018 to around 700,000 in 2024. Cut in half. Now think about what that does to a company built for 5 million cars. You still have the factories, you still have the workers, the suppliers, the contracts, the debt, all of it sized for a company that no longer exists. The plants that had been the proof of success quietly became the proof of the problem. That is not an empire. That is overhead. And this is usually where the coverage of Nissan stops. They show you the sales chart, they say the company got too big too fast, and they move on. But the sales chart is the symptom. To find the disease, you have to open the hood. Literally. Because while the executives were chasing volume, the actual product, the thing sitting in your driveway, was quietly coming apart. In 2021, Nissan made a decision it is almost certainly regretting right now. It took its best-selling vehicle in America, the Rogue, and it dropped in a brand new engine, a 1.5-liter, 3-cylinder variable compression turbo, the VC Turbo. On paper, it was a marvel. Nissan spent 2 decades and more than 300 patents building an engine that could change its own compression ratio on the fly, for more power 1 second and better mileage the next. 3 cylinders, 201 horsepower. The engineering press loved it, and then the engine started failing. The bearings inside, the main bearing, and the link bearings that hold the whole assembly together were defective. They wear out early. They shed metal into the oil. And then the engine seizes. In June of 2025, Nissan recalled nearly 444,000 vehicles for this exact problem. The Rogue, the Altima, the Infiniti, QX50, and QX55. The Rogue made up the bulk of it, and it did not stop there. By early 2026, between the bearing failures and a separate defect in the throttle body, the Rogue alone had been pulled back in recalls, totaling more than 640,000 vehicles. Now here's the part that should tell you everything, and it comes straight from Nissan's own paper trail. Federal safety regulators opened an investigation into these engines back in December of 2023. In the early months of 2024, Nissan told the government that the failures did not pose an unreasonable safety risk. A year later, the company quietly conceded that the real cause was a manufacturing defect. And then Nissan did the thing companies do when they know the problem is worse than they are saying out loud. They extended the warranty, 10 years, 120,000 miles on the engine for the affected Rogues. A car company does not hand you 10 years of engine coverage out of generosity. It does it because it has already run the math on how many of these engines are going to grenade, and it would rather pay for it on a schedule than all at once. Think about what that means if you are the person who bought one. You walked into a Nissan dealer, you signed for a brand new Rogue, you did everything right, and you are now driving a vehicle the manufacturer itself has quietly insured against its own engine. If this is the kind of breakdown you want explained without the corporate spin, subscribe, because I do exactly this with a different automaker every single week. And remember, the Rogue was supposed to be the fresh part of the lineup. The rest of it was old. While competitors redesigned their cars every few years, Nissan let models sit and age on the lot because there was no money left to update them. A tired lineup, and its newest engine is one the company has to warranty against itself. That is not a product line. That is a liability with a logo on it. So that is the product. Now let us talk about who actually pays the bill when a company this size starts to fall. It is not the executives, it is the factory floor. Start in China at Nissan's plant in Wuhan. This is a modern factory leased from Nissan's Chinese partner, built to produce 300,000 vehicles a year. 300,000. Do you know how many it was actually building? About 10,000. A plant with a capacity for 300,000 cars running at 10,000. That is not a factory. That is a monument to a forecast that never came true. Nissan is shutting it down. Then come to Mexico, to a town called Jutepec, in the state of Morelos, and a plant called Civac. And this one is not a story about a factory that failed. This is the part that should make you angry. Civac opened in 1966. It was the very first plant Nissan ever built outside of Japan. And the first car it ever assembled was the Datsun Bluebird, the same car that started it all back home. For almost 60 years, Civac built cars, and a whole town grew up around it. And here is the detail the executives will not put in the press release. Sivaki was not failing. In early 2025, that plant was running at over 90% of capacity. It built more than 120,000 vehicles the year before. It was doing exactly what a factory is supposed to do. Nissan is closing it anyway, around 2,400 workers. One of them, a contract worker, found out the plant was shutting down the day before it happened, and then showed up to be told he was not allowed to work. The governor of the state wrote a letter begging Nissan to reconsider. The president of Mexico said the company had not even told the government first. 60 years of work, a plant hitting its numbers, and the people who built those cars learned their fate from the news. Meanwhile, the people who actually made the decisions that put Nissan here, the volume bet, the broken engine, the empire that never penciled out, are not the ones standing in a parking lot in Morelos wondering how to make a mortgage payment. Look, I am not going to sit here and pretend every one of these plants could have stayed open forever. Some of this consolidation was probably real. But there is a difference between closing a factory that failed and closing a factory that worked in order to pay for the failures somewhere else. One of those is business. The other one is a bill, and it always gets handed to the same people. That is not a turnaround. That is a transfer. Which brings us right back to the top floor. Because the chaos at the bottom of this company is just a reflection of the chaos at the very top. And that chaos has a clear starting point. November of 2018, Carlos Ghosn, the man who saved Nissan, a man who ran 3 of the world's biggest car makers at the same time, lands at a Tokyo airport on his private jet, and Japanese prosecutors arrested him right there. The charge was financial misconduct, underreporting his own pay by tens of millions of dollars over several years. The savior was suddenly in a jail cell, and the company that had worshipped him spent the next year tearing his legacy to pieces. And then it got stranger. In December of 2019, while out on bail and under heavy surveillance, Ghosn escaped. He was reportedly smuggled out of the country, hidden inside a large audio equipment case, and flown to Lebanon, where he remains a fugitive to this day. Now picture what that does to a company. The man at the very top is gone in handcuffs, and then gone again in a box. And the leadership never recovered. His handpicked successor was forced out within a year over his own pay scandal. The chief executive after that drove the company straight into that $4.5 billion loss before he too was replaced. 4 men in the top chair in barely 6 years, each one inheriting a bigger mess than the last. And in their desperation, the leadership reached for a lifeline. In late 2024, Nissan and Honda announced they were in talks to merge, a deal that would have created one of the largest car companies on the planet. If you watched my video on Honda, you already know how that company tends to operate. The talks fell apart within weeks. Reporting at the time said Honda wanted to fold Nissan in as a junior partner, effectively a subsidiary, and Nissan could not stomach it. The proud company that Renault once rescued, the company that conquered the world, was now too weak to survive on its own and too proud to be absorbed. So it was left with the one move it had not used yet. Cut. And that is exactly how you end up back at Oppama. The factory that opened in 1961 and built the Datsun Bluebird is closing by 2027. The factory that built the Leaf and beat the entire industry to the electric car is closing. The first plant Nissan ever built overseas, down in Mexico, the one that also started with the Bluebird, is closing. Same company, the same little car at the root of all of it, the same pattern, decades apart. So here is the thesis. The Ghosn collapse was leadership arrogance with a pay scandal attached to it. The volume bet was leadership arrogance with a sales target attached to it. The VC turbo was leadership arrogance with a warranty claim attached to it. And the closure of Oppama is all of it finally coming home. Leadership arrogance with the company's own birthplace attached to it. Nissan did not lose its way last year. Nissan has been walking off this same cliff, slowly and deliberately, for almost 30 years. The plant where it all started is simply the place where the fall finally got too big to hide. So what happens now? The next dates are already on the calendar. The Mexican plant at CY5AC and the Wuhan plant in China are both scheduled to go dark by the end of March 2026. Oppama, the home factory, follows by 2027. And every quarter between now and then, Nissan has to report sales and losses that will tell us whether this is a real turnaround or just a slower way to fall apart. Whatever those numbers say, I will be right here with them. And if you drive a Nissan yourself, especially a recent Rogue, go and check your recall status and your warranty coverage by your vehicle identification number before you do anything else. Know exactly what you are sitting in. Then subscribe, because the next automaker on this list is already showing the very same cracks, and I am going to show you which one.